All right, good evening and welcome to the Propaganda Podcast by The Moral Economy. I was about to call it the Moral Economy Podcast, but we have in fact changed our name since the beginning of the third season, and this is the third season, the 6th episode. And I just want to say a little about the Propaganda Podcast by The Moral Economy. We do this podcast as a way of political expression, I would say. You guys agree with me on that?
Yes, sir.
We feel like, as philosophers, we should become more engaged in our political lives and we should inform ourselves, but we should also start a discussion, and that's what this podcast is to do. And without any further ado, I will now begin with the GPS. So, in Syria, the Pentagon says that a U.S. fighter jet shot down an Iranian-made armed drone on Tuesday. The Pentagon claims the drone was flying toward U.S.-backed Syrian fighters. The Pentagon declined to speculate who was operating the drone. The area has been identified as of military importance to the Syrian regime and strategically important to Iran. Russian officials have threatened to target U.S. planes flying west of the Euphrates River. The drowning increases fears of the possibility of a direct confrontation between the U.S. and Russia in Syria.
Over to the Middle East, where in Saudi Arabia.
We're in
Syria, man, Syria.
The Arabian Peninsula, man.
You did a Trump.
Really? We're already in the Middle East.
Okay.
Well,
We started
in the heart of the Middle East. In the heart of the Middle East, interesting news from Saudi Arabia, where King Salman has, in a very interesting turn of events, unprecedented for the Saudi monarchy, he has deposed his nephew as the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, as the first in line for the throne. As defense minister, Mohammed bin Salman, he's really young, just 32 years old, has been presiding over the devastating US-backed Saudi-led war in Yemen. The newly announced crown prince was also named as the deputy prime minister. Now this comes all amidst what's been called a major diplomatic crisis in the Middle East, as Saudi Arabia moved to cut diplomatic ties with Qatar. The State Department expressed confusions on Tuesday about the Saudi Arabia's decision, saying the Saudis and other Gulf countries have not yet revealed their grievances over 2 weeks after they severed ties with the Gulf country. In a surprise to nobody, the US has nonetheless agreed to sell $12 billion worth of US manufactured F-15 fighter jets to Qatar, who the Saudis severed ties with on charges of being allies to terrorists. In the latest, however, according to the State Department, according to the NDTV News, the State Department has issued a public warning to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, suggesting the Saudis may have provoked a crisis and drawn the US on false pretenses.
Meanwhile, in Yemen, according to Democracy Now!, health officials say multiple US-backed Saudi-led coalition airstrikes killed at least 25 civilians at a market in northern Sada province Sunday. More than 10,000 people have died amid the ongoing US-backed Saudi-led war in Yemen, which has also destroyed the country's health, water, and sanitation systems, sparking a deadly cholera outbreak. Yemen has been engulfed by a civil war since September 2014, when the Iran-backed Houthi rebels swept into the capital of Sana'a and overthrew the internationally recognized government.
Going over to Somalia, at least 15 people were killed in a suicide car bombing in the capital Mogadishu on Tuesday. Police say most of the victims were civilians. The militant group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack. And some news on refugees. The International Organization for Migration says as many as 120 refugees are missing and feared drowned after a boat sank off the coast of Libya on Friday. The majority of the victims were Sudanese and Nigerian. At least 2,000 refugees have now died this year while attempting to cross the Mediterranean and reach Europe. Meanwhile, in Hungary, the trial has begun of 4 men charged with killing 71 refugees who were found suffocated in the back of an abandoned, overcrowded truck in 2015. The victims were from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan and included at least 4 children. The men are also charged with human trafficking.
And in Congo, the United Nations has accused a militia linked to the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo of committing human rights abuses, including ethnically motivated attacks against women and children in the central Kasai region. This is coming from the UN Human Rights Chief, the Jordanian Said Raad al-Hussein. He says refugees from multiple villages in Cameroonian territory indicated that the Banamuda have in past 2 months shot dead, hacked or burned to death and mutilated hundreds of villages as well as destroying entire villages.
In Honduras, journalist and congressional candidate Victor Funes was murdered outside his home in the Caribbean coastal city of La Sierra last Thursday. Victor Funes directed the local nighttime television news show. Police say they've arrested a suspect in the case, and human rights groups say Funes is at least the 70th journalist murdered in Honduras since 2001.
In China and North Korea, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is meeting with Chinese officials today. Tillerson was planning to use the meetings to press Chinese officials to continue to confront North Korea over its nuclear program. But on Tuesday, another no surprise to anyone, President Trump appeared to abandon this effort in a tweet, writing, "While I greatly appreciate the efforts of Chinese Xi and China to help with North Korea, it has not worked out. At least I know China tried," unquote. Untweet. The New York Times reports that senior officials say they're trying to understand the meaning of this tweet.
That is also not unusual. Or again, while we're talking of the United States, Uber founder Travis Kalanick has resigned as CEO amid a widespread sexual harassment scandal at the Wall Street-backed ride-hailing company. His departure comes after a revolt by a number of investors who demanded that he resign. Last week, billionaire David Bonderman also resigned from Uber's board, after making disparaging comments about women at a board meeting intended to address sexual harassment, saying that if there were more women on the board, quote, "it is much more likely to be more talking," unquote. At least 20 Uber workers have also been fired over reports of sexual harassment. The dash camera video.
This new
Yeah,
story.
this is about the recent one of another police murders in the US. The recent dash camera video of police killing of an African-American motorist, Philando Castilla, in Minnesota has been released only days after the police officer Euronimo Yanis was acquitted of manslaughter. The dash on cam video shows Yanis pointing his gun at Castilla through the driver's side window. Castilla then informs the officer that he has a gun in the car, which he was licensed to carry. In the video, you can also hear the voices of Castilla's girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, and her 4-year-old young daughter, who were both inside the car. Oh yeah, again, talking about the United States. Republicans will release a draft of the healthcare bill on Thursday morning. That is tomorrow morning. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has announced the bill would strip 23 million people off their health insurance and give billions of dollars in tax breaks to wealthy Americans.
No surprise.
Republicans pushing for a vote on the bill before July 4, when the House will take a recess, in order to ensure that it passes before too much public scrutiny. McConnell said on Tuesday that the Senate bill will be different from the House bill, but has not specified how.
So I have one more thing. On Monday, as you may have heard, in London, a terrorist named Darren Osborne drove his van into a crowd of Muslims as they exited from their place of prayer. At the time, one was killed immediately and 3 were taken to a hospital with severe injuries. Yes, I just wanted to mention that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just
Mhm.
you've used the word terrorist. It's just being reported as the van driver.
I know,
Yeah.
or just a van.
Yeah.
But according to a New York Times article, the man Dan Osborne had shortly before the attack was in his sort of local pub and was yelling racial slurs against Muslims and people and minorities.
Well, okay. I mean, that concludes our GPS, and we'll get into discussion. And I think that's actually a good place to kind of start this terrorist thing. This is what I talk about later, or what will be talked about later in the CIA.
Yeah, I think this. I think it's really interesting because I was yesterday reading something about why was he not termed as a terrorist by a lot of media outlets, and why is the case that other people from other faiths and with other ethnicities are just branded as terrorists right after the attack, even when there's not much known about the motives of these people and who they are actually. So.
Well, I've been actually doing a lot of research on this lately because that's part of the topic of my CIA, and I mean that's perfectly right. They were absolutely refused even to call Dylan Roof, who killed 9 people in a church, in a black church, shot them dead, a terrorist, and yeah, they're perfectly fine with calling brown people terrorists, though.
I think we leave that then for the CIA, where the
I guess we leave that for the CIA. I mean, I think what we want to do now, as we always do after the GPS, is sort of interpret or analyze what we've read today. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
This is one of our longest headline readings that we've ever had, actually.
I would like to talk about Saudi Arabia. I think Salman, what he's done is definitely coming as a surprise. I think this is unprecedented, largely, because such a young person as Mohammed bin Salman, he's, like I said, he's just 32, and he's a very recent addition to the ruling. He's definitely a part of the ruling family, but in terms of the ruling circles, I mean, this has mostly been really old men that have run the kingdom since its establishment after the First World War. Now, this guy, Mohammed bin Salman, he has very ambitious plans for Saudi Arabia. Most recently, he was the guy behind offloading a lot of shares of Saudi Aramco and reforming the state's finances. Now he is US educated sort of guy who has lived in the West, but still there is reforms that one could expect under him. But he's also the defense minister. He also is looking after the economy partially with his father, but he's not turned out to be the same guy that a lot of people were hoping him to be in terms of being reform, voiced and carrying a lot of reforms. I mean, especially the war with Yemen. That's proved to be very futile. It's not brought Saudi Arabia any good, and now the thing with Qatar.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the connection with Qatar.
The connection with Qatar is that Qatar was trying to position itself, as tiny as that country is. It has a lot of money with its natural gas reserves, and it has tried to position itself as a player in the Middle East. It is going to be the venue for the 2022 World Cup. It is a big news outlet, and it has played definitely into the conflict in Syria, partially playing on both sides. I think that's one of the reasons that this latest spike in the confrontation between these sides in the Gulf sort of has its origins from. It has played sympathetic as well to Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, because of its own strategic interests, because they have similar interests in selling natural gas. Both Qatar and Iran are major suppliers of natural gas, unlike the other Gulf countries. And as we now see that has not helped well, because Iran is the arch enemy for Saudi Arabia, and it is not willing to admit or tolerate, I would say, any sort of opposition to its views in what Iran is. And the sort of regional rival that they see Iran as.
I think people actually kind of don't realize that Iran is this arch enemy of Saudi Arabia. well, usually when they think of arch enemies and Iran, it's Israel, right?
Absolutely.
And it's very interesting that we are friends with Saudi Arabia, which is by and far worse than Iran in terms of human rights and aggression in the region.
Of course.
And and we're ourselves so aggressive towards Iran.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of point going on to reveal that Saudi Arabia is playing into the hands of Israel, because of course Israel does not want Iran, because now, so how this works out is Iran has publicly claimed, Ahmadinejad is one of those very famous Holocaust deniers, and he's publicly called for the annihilation of the state of Israel. Now, one of the ways that Israel finds a secure existence is through empowering Saudi Arabia, as well as, of course, the strategic interest of his other major ally, the United States. Now, both Saudi Arabia and Israel are at least on the same page when it comes to Iran. They see Iran as an arch enemy. Israel, for, of course, its existential, let's say, rhetoric, logic. Saudi Arabia, because Iran is aggressively preaching a very different version of Islam, contrary to the straight religion, the straight propagated, Wahhabism, Salafism, literal hardcore 6th, 7th century Islam that is presented by Saudi Arabia. And of course, there's this competing worldviews in terms of what sort of a role does Islam have in public life, and how should it dictate public life?
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia sees it very differently, and Iran sees it very differently.
Yeah.
And they're both vying. I mean, the conflict in Yemen, of course, is a very glaring example of that. How that's played into that. Before the Houthis, claimed power from the government that was in position. That government had, of course, the blessings and the backing of Saudi Arabia. Now that the Houthis are Shia religiously, and they have the backing of Iran. And Iran has used this opportunity to sort of push back Yemen as one of those areas of Saudi influence. And now it has successfully, I would say, also outmaneuvered Qatar into coming into that position. Where Qatar definitely would rely on other allies now that it does not have Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt as its allies in the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Yeah.
Turkey has stepped in as a Sunni majority country. I think Iran would be the other player that would benefit from this training of relations within the Gulf countries. But we are, this was about Mohammed bin Salman as the crown prince. So let's wait and see what he's going to do. Mm-hmm. We'll still have to wait for King Salman to die or to...
Aren't there reports that he's been pretty bad for a while?
Yeah, right? he's of course. I mean, he's I think he's in his above 83 now. I think he's 83 or 84.
Yeah, he's pretty recent. He became king pretty recently.
Yeah, that's true.
Just last year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But again, there's the succession of the royal family within the royal family is something that has been that has been very interesting to a lot of analysts, because most of his generation, his brothers, King Salman's brothers, are septuagenarians at the youngest. And this shift from somebody who's in his 80s and to somebody who's in his 30s could mean a lot. There was, like I said, there was a lot of hopes attached with Prince Mohammed when he took over as the defense minister, as the economy minister. There was, like I said, he has ambitious plans of, ridding Saudi Arabia from its reliance on oil and offloading shares of Saudi Aramco, one of the most wealthiest companies in the world. But like I said, he's not delivered on a lot of those in his role as a defense minister, starting new wars, starting new diplomatic crises, and destabilizing the region more than what one would expect from somebody who I would say was reform-minded.
All right. Well, I mean, if no one has any more to say about the GPS, I think we should actually just go on into the CIA.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So we'll take a short break, which means little to you, actually, because you have to download the next episode and whatever. But yeah, we'll be right back.